And often to do that, it takes a team. And that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about really four steps, if you will, to success in that team. And but it's really about the fact that it always takes more than one person, and no one person can accomplish this problem. No patient, no doctor, no nurse, but together we can really make a difference. By the way, we give away all of our slides. I would ask you just to email me or tweet at me, and I would ask you just to copy them and make them better and pay it forward. How does that sound? But ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I need to tell all of you or any of you that the foot in diabetes is common, complicated, and it's costly. Let's just very briefly look at some of these data before we move on. You can see the fact that in many ways we have compared this problem to cancer. And I know it's not fair to compare one terrible problem to another one, but we all need metaphors and similes to make sense of the world. And if we have people that maybe have not experienced this problem as a clinician or as a patient, sometimes we need to explain to them that this is like something else. So let's compare it to cancer. And you've heard the horrible problems about how this is so costly. Right now, the diabetic foot is more expensive than the 5 most expensive cancers in the United States and in Canada and in the National Health Service. And then the other kind of cost, which is mortality, you see here. We see here that the problems that we treat every day, like foot ulcers, like Charcot arthropathy, like chronic limb-threatening ischemia, and various amputations, are at least as deadly as a bad form of cancer. And the only way we can move forward in this area is with a team, and if we can communicate this as a team. And I think maybe we haven't done this maybe as a family as well as we could. But if we do that and work together and come together in symposia like this, I think we really can make a difference. And to that same point, and using this cancer analogy, fairly recently we had this manuscript in the New England Journal of Medicine where we looked not only at diabetic foot ulcers, but at their recurrence. And let's look at these data very, very briefly. Forgive me. And if we look at those data, at the recurrence of data, what we know is that after healing wounds, at 1 year, 40% are going to return. It's about 2/3 recurrence at 3 years, and 3/4 of patients will recur at 5 years. So if the foot is a little bit like cancer in diabetes, then maybe when people are healed, maybe they're not healed, maybe they're in remission. And we use this word remission to help communicate it to other patients and to other doctors. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk about building a team and some of the steps to success to build a program. So if we look at this, these 3 words seem to be true, and they've been true now for a long time, that teams reduce amputation. We can go around the world to not only South America or North America, but we can go to Europe and Africa and Asia, every continent, and we see that there are now data to support putting these teams together, showing that teams reduce amputation. Maybe in certain areas, there are better ways to put a team together than others. And let's discuss that. Let's talk a little bit about the toe and talk a little bit about the flow. So first about the toe, as it were. And what we know is that looking after the foot or foot care seems to prolong the life of the of the leg, of the extremity. And you can look at these data now, they're already more than 10 years old. But if the patient, he or she sees a podiatrist, a foot specialist, along with one other member of the diabetes team, in this study of more than 1 million patients in the United States, the relative risk for amputation reduces anywhere from just about 20% to about 2/3, to about almost 66%. It's unbelievable, this reduction. If it were a 5% reduction, that would be significant for a drug. But look at this, just for one specialty. And this has been repeated now in numerous other studies since this one, from Duke University, more than a decade ago. But that's what happens when we add foot care. But what happens when we remove it? This is not a fair question to ask, but unfortunately, sometimes it can occur. And back in 2009, in the United States, in the state of Arizona, unfortunately, this occurred when budgets were cut. And foot care, or podiatry care specifically, was removed from a budget after being added for the most poor patients in our community. And what we thought would happen was maybe there would be a little increase in amputations, maybe a little increase in hospitalizations, but that a team would figure it out, or that the state would figure it out, and that the problem would kind of be resolved. And we were wrong. That's not what happened. When podiatric care was removed, it led to what we called foot in wallet disease. And we published this shortly after that those data were available. It was really unbelievable. Let me just share these data with you, because it certainly helped to convince some people that this was not a good idea. Shortly after the announcement of removal of podiatric care from the state of Arizona for these poor patients, there was immediately a 37% increase in hospitalizations for diabetic foot complications. There was a 45% increase in the per patient healthcare charges. And there was a 22% increase in length of stay. And listen to this. For what we call severe aggregate outcomes, which was sepsis, amputation, and death, that increased just about 50%. So this was really horrible. Thankfully, this study then led to the reinstitution of healthcare for patients in that state and in many other states. But now we see what happens when foot care is added. It seems to reduce amputations. When foot care is removed again, the amputations seem to return. But that's taking care of the toe. What about taking care of the flow? Let's talk about that now. And if we look at revascularization, it seems to prolong not only the life of the limb, but maybe even life itself. We see these wonderful classic data from my friend who has since passed away, Ennio Faglia from Milan. And you see up here that either if you do endovascular or open surgery, it doesn't really matter. It seems to improve odds for mortality or reduce the risk for death over a long period of time in this patient population. So we've just talked about what happens when you add when you add the toe and when you subtract the toe. And we talked about what happens when you add the flow. But what if we could mash these things up and build a team and make two great tastes taste great together, as it were. And so if we're talking about how we build a team, we can now talk about one model, which we call the toe and flow model. And this, of course, doesn't translate well, but I hope you can appreciate it. It's just putting two different surgical specialists together on one service. And by the way, this is just one model. You really don't need this model, but it seems to work really well. You can do it with other team members in many other different areas of specialty, as long as you take care of the core components that need to be addressed. And we'll talk about that a little later. So here are your two surgical specialties on one service. And what we have is within this service, in a hospital, we have a single hotline to call, only one number that the person in the emergency room or the clinician in the hospital needs to call. And we call that a hot foot line. And this makes it a lot easier for other clinicians to reach you. And when this happens, it's really a very simple model. If someone has a diabetic foot wound in the hospital, then this hot foot line is engaged, and the podiatric surgeon or the vascular surgeon sees the patient. Very often it's together. And then they ask themselves, what is the dominant problem? If the dominant problem is an infection, then the podiatric surgery, the toe portion, it takes over. If it as the primary within the team, if it is primarily an ischemic problem, then the flow person, the vascular surgeons, are the primary surgeon admitting the patient. But both groups are seeing the patient and they're aware of the patient. And then once that is resolved, then the person can be discharged from the hospital. And that's kind of the key way this works. This has been well evaluated now in the literature. I'll just show you these data from almost 10 years ago now. It's now been duplicated any number of times in the literature. But you see here in this study that was done, which was the first of the studies to look at this model specifically, we saw a 45% reduction in high-level amputation. That was fine. Many other studies have shown similar things. But what we also saw was really interesting. There was a complete change in the kind of surgery that was performed. And there were many more proactive and reconstructive procedures performed instead of previously reactive procedures and that were often ablative, like amputations. So a lot more skin grafts, a lot more osteotomies, a lot more vascular interventions, a lot fewer high-level amputations. And that was the first study to really show that. Subsequent studies have really been terrific. You see this looked at it across an entire region in Canada. There were two different cities, one, both very similar size in the same state in Canada. You have Edmonton, you have Calgary. Calgary set up a limb preservation program at their university hospital. Edmonton did not. And there was an almost immediate change in high-level amputations, as you can see here, favoring unfortunate or the center that did not set up that limb preservation program. So you see here, this really is limb sparing when you can make this happen. All right, so we've just spent a few minutes now about how to build a team. Now let's ask, for the last few minutes together, how we build a program. And now we're going to talk about not just a team, but a program across an entire city or state or even country. And it's really 4 steps to success. So let's go through these 4 steps. And again, this has been published and is widely available in the literature. You can go to this manuscript and just download it for free. or this, and that can both give you information on this. But let's talk about these 4 steps. So we start with the most acute problem, and we end with screening programs, the least acute. So the first is to set up a hot foot line. Once the person is discharged, they're discharged to a wound clinic. The third thing is once they're healed with that wound, they're not healed, they're in remission, and they go to a remission clinic. And then after that, you set up screening programs for an entire community. We've already talked about the hot foot line and its structure. We talked about one phone call and all of the triage happening internally. The measurable goals from that first step to success include the length of hospital stay and a high to low amputation ratio. It's very simple. You just take the high amputations and you put them over the low amputations, and hopefully you have the lowest number that you possibly can have, because that means you're doing fewer high-level amputations. So that's the first measurable portion of the program. What about the second step? And that's once someone has been discharged from the hospital and they've had their vascular disease addressed and they've had their infection addressed in the hospital, now they can be discharged outpatient to these tissue loss clinics, to these wound clinics. And the goal here is very similar to the previous goals, but now they can do it outpatient, and you're just dealing with the wound. And the goal here is good quality debridement, offloading, and wound healing and wound care. And the measurable goals here are also length of stay and high to low amputation ratio like before, but also time to healing. So that was the first 2 of these 4. We've looked at the hot foot line and the wound clinic once the person is discharged. But once the wound is healed, remember, we talked about this before, they're not healed, they're in remission. And the big idea here is to extend the days in remission as best as possible. And you could set up an entire clinic that's based on that, with good quality shoe gear and insoles and physical therapy and podiatric care and dietitians, all focusing on keeping that person healed as long as possible, understanding that it's very likely they will develop another wound, but the goal is to make the wound as unusual and as uncommon, and as short-lived as possible. That's the big idea with these remission clinics that we can set up. And again, the goal really is just to dose that activity just like we dose a drug. Too high, and someone might re-ulcerate. Too low, and they might not get the cardiometabolic benefit. That's the big idea here. You have to have a dose range, just like you're dosing a drug. And the measurable goals here are, the big ones are ulcer-free days, hospital-free days, and activity-rich days, which we now can measure with a lot of activity monitors that some of our patients may have in their smartphones or in other things like that. And of course, the high-low amputation ratio. I would tell you, we don't have time to talk about this, but if we look at patients in remission, sometimes the wound, when it recurs, is not in the exact same spot. And we call that ulcer metastasis. And I would just tell you to learn that 8 in 10 of these wounds are sometimes in a different location, and half of those are often on the other foot. So don't lose sight of the fact that the wound may recur somewhere else when evaluating these patients when they're in remission. So those were the first 3. We're almost finished with these 4 steps to success. We talked about the hot foot line for the urgent problem in hospital. The wound clinic is number 2. When they're healed, they're not healed, they're in remission. And our goal is to extend ulcer-free days there. But finally, the least kind of acute and the largest population-based concept is a screening clinic. And the goal there is to get people in a community program screened. And it does not have to be a physician or a surgeon screening these patients. It could be a nurse. It could be a technician. We can do a really rapid 3-minute foot exam now on many of these patients. And then you can put them into classifications like this one that the National Health Service uses: low, moderate, and high risk. And then if they have a wound or an infection or something like that, we call it active, and that's even more urgent. But you can see you can build entire programs around this sort of thing and refer them into one of the other clinics that we've already mentioned in the steps to success. And again, the measurable goals here are similar to what you saw for the remission clinic. The big ideas: ulcer-free days, hospital-free days, activity-rich days, and that improved high to low amputation ratio. And ladies and gentlemen, let me show you just very briefly this stairway. And it's not a stairway to heaven; it's a stairway to amputation. And you can see we can go up or down this stairway, and we can make a difference here, from diabetes to neuropathy to ulceration to infection to amputation. But I'll just show you that the toe and flow portions of the team, podiatric and vascular surgery, overlap surgical, medical, mechanical duties really elegantly. And it's really beautiful because they can share some of their responsibilities, and then there are other unique ones that overlap. But again, you can do this with other physicians and surgeons and technicians and nurses, not just the podiatric and vascular surgeons as well. The cool thing is that this has led now to entire initiatives in the United States and elsewhere. 10 years ago, more than that, we had the first ever dual issue of the Journal of Vascular Surgery and the Journal of the American Podiatric Medical Association, which put together talked about building these teams nationwide. This has now become really, really popular. It has since led to a brand new society. And I will tell you, you are so welcome to this society. It's called the American Limb Preservation Society, and you can all join. This is really designed to bring together clinicians that care about the problem. We say it's like a dating app or a marriage counselor. It's like a eHarmony or Tinder or something for clinicians who care about amputation reduction. And you can go to this on Twitter or to the website, and you're so very welcome anytime to go to this. And ladies and gentlemen, I will just conclude with this. I'm a podiatrist, but I used to play soccer. I played football for my whole life, all the way through university, and I'm a goalkeeper. And if you're a striker, if you're a forward, you can miss 19 shots, make one shot, and you are a hero. And if the same thing happens to you and you're a goalkeeper, you're not the hero. And I always felt like being in clinic and taking on these high-risk limbs that I still feel like a goalie in a lot of ways. But I saw this video and I thought it made me laugh. So I wanted to share it with you. So look at this. This isn't me in the goal, but it certainly feels like it. So you see this guy, and I thought when I first saw this video, I said, man, that's me. Not in the goal, but in clinic, looking like a dummy, looking silly, but still somehow I'm in position to make a save. And it made me think of this wonderful quote that I hope translates from Mason Cooley. This is almost 100 years ago that he said this. He said, if you position yourself well enough, circumstances will do the rest. And I think that's true for us. That's why we come together like a family. No matter where we are in the world, no matter what we do as a clinician, we want to, and we come together to share our successes and our failures, and it improves our position. And hopefully, with a better position, we can be in position to make a difference for our patients, and not only just to save a few legs, as it were, but to help people move through the world a little bit better every day. Because I think that's what we all deserve, no matter what our health or no matter what our age. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been such a pleasure, just un honor y un placer. Really, it's just absolutely positively. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next time here in Los Angeles or down south.